Yeah, like there's huge advantage coming up for punch up, but Jeff does get hacked. There is a beat to stop the effectiveness of the grab. So that's out. Jeff does have a shatter. He's able to get a big one. He will be, and a heal. Oh. Jeff gets 4. That should be enough to capture the point. LPM is that though. But the beat is.
Never have I seen a team so lacking in immediately obvious star potential, only to bring it all together with the raw power of teamwork. They were never flashy, but they also never fell flat on their face, at least not when their full roster was able to show up. Though whatever coaching drills and team building were deployed, Pepega managed to construct one of the most consistently dominant teams this league has ever seen, despite it coming from seemingly nowhere. Let's take a look at how this drastically underrated team made their run all the way to the grand finals and become the novice division's runner-up.
From the start, Pepega friends were put into an interesting position. Shash, a Season 0 veteran and the original captain of the original Newt Newt, was placed in charge of managing. Quite a few of his former colleagues from the OG Newt Newt followed him, making for an experienced core of leadership in this fledgling team. Just prior to the novice draft, the team made one final pickup to their coaching staff, namely the advanced free agent Tedison. He was looking to be a part of any team, having gone undrafted, and Shash took advantage of the opportunity to grab a higher-ranked player's perspective. This would prove to be one of the most important pickups for the team's first half of the season, as Tedison is credited with teaching the team most of the compositions that led them to their strong start. Come the draft itself, however, and no one outside of Pepega really knew what to make of the player lineup. Very few other teams were aware of the players they were going for, so Shash and his crew were either geniuses for stealing diamonds in the rough, or they were taking a gigantic gamble on unproven players. Almost everyone assumed it would be the latter and placed Pega friends very low in their preseason rankings, but the team would soon prove the entire league wrong.
To begin the season, Pepega came out swinging hard in Week 1, taking a dominant victory over the fan-favorite Platchat. Their opponent looked completely disoriented throughout the game, and the intense amount of practice Pepega friends had under their belts immediately showed. The following week, they would go to earn a clean sweep against Real Redemption as well, who talked a lot of shit that week, quickly cementing themselves at the top of the leaderboard, a spot they would never give up for the remainder of the season. However, Week 3 would prove to be the real proving ground in the eyes of the general community. Up until this point, the predictions have all been against Pepega, all wrong by the way, and this week was no different. One Trick Wonders was the only remaining team in Novice to hold an undefeated record, and these two were on a collision course for what was considered a clash of the Titans. Despite all the hype surrounding the match, and the fact that One Trick Wonders managed to steal a map, Pepega friends consistently looked like the stronger team in that game. No one stood out as a solo carry, but rather the team appeared as one cohesive unit. By the end of the series, they had thoroughly dismantled One Trick Wonders and proved the analysis wrong once and for all. After this match, everybody knew Pepega Parrots was the best team in the league, and from then on, they would be the ones claiming favor in all the pre-match predictions. Moving into Week 4, just about everyone had expected the reigning #1 seed to take the still struggling Bopburgers in an easy 4-0 or a nice easy win. Despite them claiming their 4th win in a row, Pepega would later confess that this was their most difficult match of the first 5 weeks. The Popbusters put up an incredibly strong fight and very nearly brought it to map 5, but were shut down shy of the Oasis tiebreaker.
Looking back on this game, the players recall the coaching staff becoming somewhat inactive, besides a select few such as Snowman and Zimzif. What's more is that the players themselves grew somewhat complacent, having claimed 3 back-to-back victories up until that point. The fact that their opponents were one of the lowest rated teams in the league didn't help this borderline stagnation either. During the game itself, the team claims that their main tank All Mike started to succumb to tilt, eventually opting to be subbed out in favor of Yam. Now, Yam was considerably lower SR compared to his counterpart, but he made up for it by acting as a morale booster for the rest of the team. The team would often refer to him as the hardest working member among Pepega friends, despite not even starting. He'd consistently go out of his way to seek out coaching and practice his heart out just to improve at his role. Not to mention that the rest of the starting lineup was still in, meaning that they were more than capable of working with Yam to continue on as the beast of a machine they'd been up until this point. As already mentioned, Pepega would go on to win this match, but it took every ounce of fight in them. The players managed to avoid being too shaken up by their first tough opponent, but the earful they got from the coaches afterwards was a heavy hit to their morale. Pepega's players lost confidence in their decision making, which didn't bode well for their final game before the break. Double Cap was a mess, to put it lightly, but despite that they were managing to slowly cement a strong starting roster around the time week 5 rolled around. DC was basically the antithesis of Pepega in a few fundamental ways, most of all being that Double Cap had utterly insane amounts of star power, but little teamwork to show for it. In theory, a team like Pepega should be capable of taking the win by forcing DC to adapt outside of their comfort zone. Unfortunately, it's never quite that simple. The day prior to the match, the team learned that All Mic was unavailable, meaning Yam had to play full-time with basically no practice. While we just said how hardworking their main tank sub was, expecting him to perform against the bombastic ball of aggression that is King Genius may have been too tall an order. Pepega friends clawed their way to the final round of Map 5 before ultimately conceding their first defeat in their history. The team's perfect half season was ruined and their morale was through the floor.
Around this time, Pepega decided to team up with Crest as their academy team, and shift their branding slightly to Pepega Parrots. They also sought out some coaching from Crest, receiving it mostly from a few players like J Venom and Moby. Other than the new aesthetic, however, the team went on usual business without very many changes to the roster throughout the break.
Despite the hard loss in week 5, Pepega were still incredibly confident in their own play. They were certain that if they had just stuck to what they were good at, they could retain their first place spot. And sure enough, they came into week 6 absolutely dominating Platchat once again. They even managed to 4-0 them this time around, instead of tying. The easy win did help morale, though of course it was only Platchat. They would become a worthwhile opponent only in the postseason. Week 7 is when the Parrots' world started to get a bit shaky. For some odd reason, the team's management thought it would be a good idea to pick up Grape Cake from free agency, despite already having 2 main tanks, only to drop him shortly thereafter. The manner in which Grape was dropped, and the lack of communication about the roster change with everyone was unfortunately in direct violation of the league's rules set in place to protect players from abusive managers, which ended up costing Pepega 1 forfeited map going into their match against Rio. This entire incident would later become known as the Grape Cake situation. The game against Rio Redemption was the perfect storm of terrible timing, poor decisions, and improper scouting that led to what was easily the most devastating loss in Pepega's entire season. On top of going into the game 1 map down, Pepega was expecting Rio to play nothing but goats, but as it turns out, Rio played almost exclusively DPS comps. This, combined with the already rock-bottom team morale, led to a 3-1 victory for Rio. The team would continue on the rest of the season, not looking half as dominant as their former selves just 1 month prior. They would defeat weaker opponents like One Trick Wonders and Week 10's Double Clap, but they were also outmatched by the likes of Rio and Bot Burgers, both of which were looking like championship caliber teams. Despite closing out the regular season in first place and securing their spots in the semifinals, Pepega's chances of making it to the grand finals were starting to appear questionable. The one significant event that happened within the team during this period just before the signing window closed is that Yam retired and Pepega picked up Tofu as his replacement. They would play Tofu on occasion in the last few matches of the regular season, though it became immediately apparent by his performance that All Mic would remain the starting main tank for the time being. There were initially questions about All Mic's availability for the finals, assuming they made it that far, as well as the very real potential that he would succumb to tilt at another crucial moment. They would not have their mental carry in Yam like they did back in week 4, and the question remained as to whether Tofu could fill those shoes if the need arose.
As luck would have it, literally everything about everyone's predicted playoff brackets was thrown out the window after 1 round, meaning that Platchat and Double Clap would advance to the semis, leaving Rio and OTW in the dust. Beginning in the first seed, Pepega was allowed to choose their opponents, and unsurprisingly, they went with a safer pick against DC. Platchat was a complete wildcard with their newfound momentum, and it wasn't worth taking the risk of taking them on now. Instead, they chose a path that would require facing only one of these potential powerhouses. Pepega whizzed by their semifinal match against Double Clap at blistering speed, leaving them claiming a 3-0 victory. At one point in the season, DC may have been considered a rival of Pepega. Now they were nothing more than a time sink they had to wait out before advancing further. And while they may have struggled in finding their footing throughout the second half of the season, they were now looking as polished and as coherent as they did in pre-week 5. As fate would have it, in the grand finals would be a set of 2 extremes of the regular season. Platchat had blasted their way through both Rio and Bot Burgers to make it here, and it was looking like nothing could halt their momentum. Tofu had to play instead of All Mic, and with Tofu playing considerably better than ever before, he was obviously the right pick. The final game of the season was underway, and to everyone's surprise, Pepega took an early 2-0 lead. The series was the first of 4, so it was a long way over, but nonetheless, they actually managed to claw it out in an early couple of maps with some stellar Sombra Goats play. However, the second map in particular was impossibly close. playoffs, and Platchat began to adjust their playstyle. Sure enough, the underdogs put their name on the board, delaying what seemed at first like a quick defeat. The storyline swayed back and forth, Pepega grabbing a lead only for Platchat to tie it up. It continued like this all the way to the 7th and final match. There was a potential to draw, but both teams exhausted and out for blood at this point. Victory was only one clutch play or one mistake from either side.
The Parrots didn't quite manage to finish out Hollywood, stopping just a few meters shy of the 3rd point, creating the ultimate win condition. Allow Platchat to push it to the box on the floor, and they'd bow out with the silver medal. But if they could stop them, sure, no matter where, they'd finally claim the championship. Not even the final fight, but the final stall for Platchat's attack had so much going on at once. Pepega pushed the attackers away just a few meters from the finish line, with ults to spare and approximately 30 seconds left. Platchat was in desperation mode, with less ultimates than the defenders and little hope remaining. What ensued was quite possibly the craziest and luckiest fight of their lives. Comms on Pepega's end were ramping down as they believed they had already won, and there's basically no communication about how they would use their ultimates to close out the series once and for all. Instead, as Platchat barreled through the corridor, Pepega met them with mostly vanilla Overwatch, meeting no complex strategies nor any tactful ultimates. Effective gameplay. The problems started to arise when Pepega's ultimates weren't getting enough value, and the attackers kept gaining ground. Towards the end of the fight, Platchat had about 4 men on the cart. Meanwhile, Pepega only had about 3 defending, with the rest trickling in. Tofu saw a split-second opening for a large shatter to isolate and finish off the massive majority of Platchat, and he went for it. However, nobody was expecting a waste to put up his shield as Brigitte at that exact moment, utterly saving his team, allowing them to stall for long enough to regain their entire 6-man cart presence and ultimately clear out their remaining defenders. It was the largest upset in the entire season, even rivaling Easy Collab's Season 0 wildcard run for the hype built around it, and ultimately, the Pepega Parrots would fail to stop the most impossible playoff run anyone could have conceived. They brought Platchat to the very brink and fell just short of the ultimate victory. While the question of what if lingered in their minds, they were stuck accepting 2nd place and looking to themselves as their parent team crest for consolation.
In all honesty, Pepega was one of my absolute favorite teams to watch throughout this season. I personally ranked them very low at the start of the season, and I didn't truly grasp the caliber of team they were until around week 4. They proved me wrong harder than any other Season 1 roster, and I couldn't be happier for that fact. What's more is that they've earned a great deal of my respect for how they did it. If I had to, I honestly couldn't name anyone on the team that was a quote-unquote star. Each and every one of their players were above average in their respective roles, and they put in an insane amount of effort to becoming the best team possible. That level of cohesion is hard to come by no matter where you look, but when a roster manages to build it, it's a thing of beauty. And to be fair, I don't really blame them that much for their shortcomings in the grand finals. The sheer momentum Platchat had is unlike anything we've ever seen in this league, and we may never see anything like it ever again. It's extremely reminiscent of Season 1 London Spitfire. They caught fire at the exact right time, and nothing in the universe, or the next, was going to stop them. Now, I can't speak for the entire community when saying this, but when people in the future ask me who I thought the best team in Season 1 Novice will be, it has to be Pepega Parrots. Sure, there are some teams with higher peaks, DC, Botbusters, Rio, and postseason Platchat to name a few, but not a single team was as consistently dominant regardless of the trials they went through. And that is truly the best way to sum up their season in a single word: consistent. A+.